Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. And let me know if you can't hear me or if there's anything a little bit off. Happy to check. Starting a new painting today. It's going to be an oil painting in 3 1-hour sessions, and I will keep the chat open. Feel free to ask me any questions along the way. I'll try to, explain my process as I go and give you a view of how I complete a painting from start to finish. And this is going to be, hopefully something that beginners can find useful. Um, and if you're more advanced and you have some experience, you want to kind of refresher or just get a new perspective on maybe your own practice, great to have you here. And feel free to jump in. And oh yeah, this reference image is great. I believe this is from that amazing group of photographers on Facebook that it's free reference photos for artists. So look into that group if you're a painter. There are many people out there that love to take photographs and they love paintings and they so appreciate it, but they need, maybe a little cooperation with an artist such as yourself. So to get started on this lovely image, which reminds me very much of like the California coastline, I'm just going to be doing and this is, by the way, like a slightly bigger image this time. This is like a 16 by 20 canvas. I believe the last one I did was 11 by 14. It feels like a bit of a jump. To get started on this, I'm just going to sketch in oil on a canvas that I prepared a little bit. And as I mix up my oil color here with just a little bit of turp, I will tell you how I prepared this canvas, because this is a very cheap one of those little multi-pack canvases. We use a lot of them here at the studio in our classes. You're not always going to spend money for a high quality canvas, right? We also teach kids classes here. So how I prepared this, because this is actually feeling really good and really, ready to go. It was kind of saggy and there was lots of little puckers and fabric pulling and the surface looked really thin. So I used some Tighten Up canvas restretcher and I used that on the back. It took all of those folds out, and on the front I added a layer of like a blackout acrylic white, and then I kind of toned it with like a light gray acrylic paint. And all of that was just, an hour or so ago. So as I get started here, I've got this really nice loose mixture of oil paint. It's very kind of watery, terpy, I should say. And I'm using just a dark, thin, sort of neutral color, nothing too strong. I'm putting a mark down where I believe I want the horizon line to go. I think that's going to look nice. Kind of like that placement. And now, sort of thinking about placement for just these main shapes. Right dead in the center is, if I'm looking at this reference, that large formation, that hill in the mid-ground, that ends like right in the center. There we go. So now I have a center point, a little reference point. I'll start there. Okay, that could be the very bottom of that middle formation. It's very close to the top of the composition. And I might just sort of shift it out like that instead of being true to what's here. I think I like that a little bit better. And if I don't, I can change it as I go. Now, in relation to the top of that hillside, which I have moved down, I'll move back a little bit, find some place for this distant land formation here. A little bit lower. And of course, the bottom of it, and really the entirety of it, is below that horizon line. Everything is very, you know, close in this area. I might want to clean it up just a little bit. I just switched brushes. I'm going to use, let's see if this brush is clean enough. A big flat brush, just scrub away a little bit because I think these lines are a bit too nondescript. They're a little too thick. They're a little too flat, and they weren't really describing in this very small area. So I just kind of took them down a notch, and we're going to let that part of the canvas set up and dry for just a moment. And then I'll replace that with a little bit less, paint and a finer line quality, shall we say. In the meantime, I'll just work my way over here. Now, I don't want to make these forms too, like, what's the word? Conventional or too regular or like expected, because that would be very easy to do. We think like coastline. You just you get that little zigzag line and it can become a little cheesy, I think, if I'm not careful. So I want to make sure that I'm getting something that feels more random and less like symbol of a coastline and a little bit more descriptive of like what we're actually seeing here. And it's not like it's it's got to look one way or it's going to look wrong. There are so many ways this could go, but just the direction and like the energy of the lines, the waves going this direction, the land going that direction. All of this is really what the composition is made of here. So placing that now and really thinking about just the directional changes. That's kind of what's on my mind as I block in a picture at this stage. So. And this is going to be very light. I really want to push that back even more. I think this has to go a little higher. That has to go a little lower. There's so much happening to, this back landscape form back here. There's so many different, the tree color, and then there's this amazing lush, like yellow green color in here. And then there's this like kind of terracotta color back in here. And then there's tree color again. And all of that, I just want to sit in this little color and value range that just hovers back there in the distance near the sky. So that's one thing that is an intention that I have for this painting, to get all of those colors, but to like kind of have them affected by atmospheric perspective, and therefore really just change them all subtly so that they just sink back into the distance. Now you have me saying that on video. We're definitely going to talk about that again when we get to that color mixing part. All right, so let's see what we're going to do with this. Like I said, I changed the composition a little bit. Really like these little trees up here though. And I'm going to put them in. I bet it'll be fine. I think the trees give it such a nice sense of scale. Like there are these tiny little trees. And when you look and see that those are trees, of course, we know just, you know, from seeing that the height of this formation and that like incredible scale. I think something when, when you're painting in nature like this, making sure that viewers have some sense of scale is something you can consider. So, pretty blue on this color as I was chatting. So let's go with it. Now I've dulled that down just a little bit. I don't want to go too saturated, but I am ready to start at least seeing what that would look like. And I'm mixing the blue a little less saturated by putting it in with that drawing mixture of paint. Really thin, nothing major yet. We can absolutely build up to more paint on the surface, and it's almost just a little rough sketch, like it just to block in a summary. Now, as we move into this area, like I said, there's so many opportunities for shapes, and that's really what the composition depends on. That's what makes the composition. So be careful here that I don't end up, kind of painting a wall or something. We're going to really try to use this stage to lay the groundwork for like interesting directional marks. So don't paint it flat. You're not filling anything in. We're really just we're gonna think water. We're gonna think, dynamic compositional directions. And we're gonna think like oppositional angles, right? So sometimes this angle here can kind of be opposed by something going across it. And there's so much complexity you can get that way. But start laying that in now. You might forget what the marks mean. I don't know. They turn into something. It's really fun to watch it develop. It's like as much as you might want to plan and as much as you might want to consciously create things, sometimes just knocking your painting over. Sometimes just kind of letting it unfold and just seeing how things develop as time goes on is really going to get you much more interesting results, right? I can't wait to put this terp stage behind me because honestly, it's kind of fumy in here and I'm not loving that. And this is a larger piece. I tend to do this stage lately in acrylic, to be honest. And doing this now in oil, I think next time I'm going to do this. I just don't see the point of doing this in oil. I really don't. And yet here I am doing this in oil. Can do it in oil. Maybe I should have this terp covered a little bit, and possibly this should be filled with somewhat cleaner terp. But it is a fact, if you're using an odorless mineral spirit to thin down your paint and you're applying it all over a somewhat large surface area, it's going to evaporate off and it will fume. So, keep that in mind. And I think moving forward, I'm going to really start to stress that acrylic underpainting method because this is just silly. Now, when I go out landscape painting, I used to take my whole set of acrylics and like literally do a whole layer in acrylic and then switch to oil, but I just can't carry all that. Now we are outside when we go landscape painting, and so the fumes aren't really that much of an issue. But here in the studio, I do think that it's kind of worthwhile. And if you have access to two sets of paint, of course you can do oil over acrylic, but not the other way around. I love how the sand, that layer of like that sort of nice pale brown gray kind of coming through here. So I will be switching to that color fairly soon. And if you can kind of hear that brush, it's like spreading the paint really, really thin. We're not going very thick at all. And it's almost just whipping the paint across the surface. And that leaves a really thin layer of paint. It shows a little color, but it's not like taking up a lot of, you know, the session by being like a super wet, area that I can't work into. I wouldn't want that because I hope to get back into these areas at least a little bit and get some layering happening today. This has only been 20 minutes, and I think, starting to see this image. I should probably step back and see what else I'm missing. Let's do that. I think I'll put the sky in. I think that'll change things pretty significantly. And when I step back to look at a painting, I'm always thinking about what is going to be the biggest, most significant difference I can make right away. So don't start with the details. Start with the big picture and work your way down to the details. All right. Still don't really want to break out the white paint. Let's see. I think I'll try this with just a little bit of a scrubby dry brush. Before I get into that sky color, which I will add some white paint for, take that same color though, that's going to be the base for that. Do a little work just with a thin layer of that intense blue color under some of these trees. Not too early to get a bit of that color moving through. All right. And of course I am going to need some white for this color because it is a very light color. We'll just cover that back up. That is ultramarine blue. Definitely not the only blue in town for this color. And actually, I don't think that quite a mixture of these two, but maybe. The other blue that I have on my palette currently is cobalt teal. So, well, the ultramarine blue is very purpley blue. Looks a little bit on the gray side. Cobalt teal is a really nice, more greenish blue. As I hold that up, but it's a very important question here. So we have to make sure we get the right balance between these two. And I can also look at adding another blue to this sky situation. Actually, I kind of like this one right here, which is a mix of the more purpley ultramarine and then the more greenish cobalt teal. We're just going to use this brush, which has a little thinned out blue paint on it already, so it might shift it a little bit, but you'll see momentarily. I'm definitely going to be scrubbing this in. It's not like a final layer or anything. And as such, and I want to assure you, it is not that important that you get exactly the right color. You're going to be able to go through here multiple times. Now, should we just use any color? No, no. No, no. We should not just use any color, but it doesn't have to be the be all end all either, right? Like we're going to be able to adjust, we're going to be able to go through, and layers really do add up to some beautiful results in terms of the final color that we're going to see. So here's a great opportunity for me to add a little bit more information in terms of the contour of this land formation, right? Something like that. I still don't see the darkness in this area that we need to like get a sense of that visually. So let's go in there right away. Let's get something just a little darker. Remember, we were talking about the careful nature of the color mixing for this. But again, not in all one layer. We don't have to get in all one layer. So I just want to be careful that I'm not limiting myself, my choices for later. All right. Do so. I'm going to make sure that I keep my paint pretty thin. A little bit lighter. I want to see that darker value against sky value. Much more concerned with value at the moment, and then we'll kind of get into color as like the sum of all of its different layers. It's not done in one layer. I think sometimes you make these little marks more interesting. You just kind of find them there and you just make the mark more interesting. Or you find something that like you want to change into part of your drawing or description. And you kind of get those marks by just simplifying properly from the get-go. If you simplify properly, you end up with these like amazing, well, best case scenario. I'm not trying to say me, but simplifying lets the painter have these marks that are, I don't know, useful, descriptive. They're something that you're going to want to build those layers of description upon. I'm really going to lighten this up. This is pretty distant, maybe too much. Okay. I think better too much than too little at this stage. And we still haven't totally named where the horizon line is. And if I have, I might change it. I don't care. Like in there. Now I notice the bottom section of that land formation gets, I think, more purple and darker as it moves in. So I've shifted the color to more ultramarine blue. I'm not going to get caught up making myself repeat that mantra. I am not going to get caught up. All right, I wanted to get back in here with a color for this water where it cuts in, because it is not too early to establish something nice through here, and it would be super useful, convenient, and more productive to kind of get this done now. I'm trying to get a little paint back here that's worth something, a little paint that we can kind of use in the final layers. Truly hope that color will work for where it is, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen as things develop. I can always change. However, I hope it works. And then I'm going to come back across here with this dark, and that's just going to bring that formation right in front of that little bay of water back there. So that it's just a little efficiency, I would say. Just trying to be efficient with these quicker studies. I see like a little bit of a white edge or like a little break line of water along that bottom edge of this land formation. It's a little too micro to get into right now, don't you think? I can hear you saying yes. It is. Too small to get into. Let's back up. Let's take a look at this big picture. And look what happened. I did get some sky color on, but it really didn't have much impact, so I just moved on. However, before I destroy this color on the palette, accidentally or otherwise, we're just going to take our sky color and put this in here. Talked about this little line of trees back here. So I'm already thinking about like creating some little marks or shapes. So I went vertically with the brush just to create a few random marks that might later on down the road become a little line of trees, right? Might as well start now. Just try to get the character of like what's going on there in any possible way that you can as soon as possible. So that, might just be like rubbing the brush in a certain direction that maybe later those marks turn into trees, turn into waves, turn into whatever it is, or getting just a little color variation so that your marks are more visible. Backing up, I still really want to make some decisions about the greens that we're seeing here, about wow, there's a lot happening in these next two areas. Before I move on to those, just really fast, I'm just going to scrub through a little bit more of this shape. Even if it's just kind of thin and transparent, taking that down one little notch right there, about how dark it needs to be. Okay. So there's some kind of warmer color over here on this land formation. Look at how absolutely wrong that color looks, even on the palette, doesn't it? It's just not even in there anywhere. That's absolutely fine. It's like an electric orange kind of color. And what could complement that, what could take that color down a notch, is maybe this more violety blue. Now, isn't that something that violety blue is exactly what I used in the sky? And when I look at that color, now that is in there. That is close to the color of the land that I'm seeing here. So it was this like crazy looking terracotta color, and then we just like put the sky color into it, and then it dulled it exactly into the right color. Sky color is kind of complementary, more or less, but more importantly, it's the sky. It's everywhere. It's affecting all the colors underneath. So that is, when you have both of those things going for you, can the color be wrong? Let's find out. So we have this very yellowy color. Wow, I'm using so many brushes today. This is absolutely horrendous. You know how I feel about using so many brushes. Oh, more people have joined. Hello. Susan's here. Elaine's here. Welcome. Very exciting. All right. So, I better put my reference down so you can see the painting, but I like this color a lot. This is the one that we're blocking in, just kind of mixed up that terracotta, dulled it down with a little sky color. Let's figure out a way to trail this color through this shape in a less than, less than basic, more than basic, let's say, more than basic way. We want to make this as interesting a shape as possible. Build up this relationship between all of these colors even now. So constantly thinking about like the directional qualities, which way does that angle take the viewer? What sense of like tension do those two angles create together? It's really just like an abstract puzzle. It does get a little overwhelming sometimes. So keep it simple. That's my reminder, mostly to myself. Don't go down, too many layers into breaking this shape up in this first pass. We can definitely break this up more as we go. We just really need to kind of like start really basic and make sure that like all the players are on the court, like we still have this kind of purpley brown gray color, and I'm going to take what's left of the sky color, which I don't really need at the moment, and I definitely need more white paint, which by the way I never fixed and is still exploding white paint all over me, so that's going to be fun. Okay. Oh, see. Yep. Yep. Need some duct tape in aisle 1. Clean up in aisle 1. We have exploding paint tubes all the time, and I'm sure you all know. If you don't know, duct tape is a great thing to keep around your studio. I've got some about 10 feet away from me, and yet this will probably remain unfixed for, several days. All right. Back to this color. I was going to mix up with a little more white. I was going to mix up like this purpley brownish kind of gray color over here. Very ultramarine based color. We can take a little bit of this quinacridone to make it more purple, a little at a time. Quinacridone is a magenta. I believe it's sort of replacing alizarin. Alizarin's a little bit more brown, but it's not light fast apparently, and will fade in your painting as time goes on. Now I just added a touch of burnt sienna to the color because I wanted like more of that earthy earth tone. And now I'm finding a random brush to paint this in. Not random, it's got a little sky color on it. That's not the worst thing in the world. I'm going to clean it out as best I can just with the rack, just wiping out the color. If you haven't seen how this goes before, and some people like to wear gloves to protect their delicate manicures. But you know what? I don't. All right, so because I had a little sky color on the brush, I think that builds in a little harmony. And this color is a kind of low grade version of what I'm imagining. A low grade version of itself. I might add a little pink. And again, that's the quinacridone magenta, which I essentially use in place of alizarin crimson almost all the time. The consistency of the paint, it's pretty thin. It's fairly dry. I'm really using some pressure to move it, but I have a little bit of like turp on my brush still, a little thinner, so that I can get that a little tiny bit more transparent and it moves a little more easily. And this is just such a, it's such a process of experimenting and having someone like next to you to show you like the exact feeling and consistency, because it really varies like how you're loading up the brush, how much pressure are you putting on the brush. There's not like a certain formula that one can be given that's going to like solve all the problems of like what to do with the consistency of this paint. Oil painting, I think that, is one of the best things that you can kind of discover about it is how to manipulate the consistency of the paint for your purposes. Let's mix some greens. I'm going to go back into this little weird terracotta pile. Okay. That's the color. That was the ground plane. We kind of scrubbed that under here. I mixed that with like a yellow ochre, quinacridone, magenta, a little bit of white with the teal over here first. And I'm just going to slowly add that to just tone that color down a little bit. I know you're probably thinking, why, that's not green at all. And you are correct. We're going to need a lot more yellow. I want it to be like one of those warm, kind of like very zingy. That's the word I use a lot to describe green, at least in my own head. It's zingy, it's got zing. So that just to me means that there's like an orange in that green. I guess that's what that means. Let me get a brush without putting my face in the camera. Here we go. Much better. All right, and coming back through, like I like it. I was just about to paint it in, but now I want a second one. I want a darker green. So now I've got this, looks like a Prussian blue and a Viridian green. Very dark. I'm gonna go with a little bit of yellow ochre. And again, just that kind of lemony, oof. Much more lemony yellow. I'm going to put them right next to each other so you can kind of see those two in action. And I still think I want like something a little darker here. So that was Prussian and Viridian over here. Take a little ultramarine. It's kind of the purpley blue. We can kind of dull that down. Let's see how these go. Oh, instead of using this brand new brush, I'm just going to put that down so that I don't have to wash it later. And that's much better than washing it later. So, start with this darker color. I think so. I think it'll work. I'm really turning the brush, scooping up all of the paint, getting as much paint on my brush as I can before this. So yeah, so the oil, like using the oil to thin the paint, I usually mix in a little bit of paint thinner, like a Turpenoid or a Gamsol with linseed oil. And I make a medium of about 50% Gamsol and 50% linseed. Now, when I start, I really want that to evaporate very quickly. So I start just turp and it's really thin and it's very scrubby. But as you build those layers, you want like a little bit more gloss, a little more slide with that paint over the surface, not soaking in. Also, just for like conservation purposes, just to keep your paint layers from building incorrectly, which would be like a really thin, lean layer over a really fat, thick layer. Fat meaning like oil and thickness of paint. So just adding that oil as you go. One, it just feels a lot better once there's paint on the surface to have like less drag. You know, you just want that like more flowy feel to the paint. And hopefully in the next, whatever it is, 15 minutes or so, I will have most of the information in for like what's left, you know, just for this block in layer. And like I said, this is gonna be a 3-session painting. I'm gonna come back to this for 2 more hours. I feel like so far I'm on track, but that's not really saying much. To be honest, anything can happen. I could definitely go off the rails. So, you know, come on back and see. But really, what I mean is like schedule wise, you want to like go through all of the same steps. The entire process is exactly the same, whether you're spending, you know, 1 hour, 3 hours, or 30 hours. You're going to do the process. You're going to spend like a proportionate amount of time at each stage of the process. So, that being said, you should sort of feel like, okay, I'm on track, or, you know, get a sense of where you are by doing a lot of paintings and going through this process a bunch of times. And they don't even have to be good paintings to learn the process. That's the incredible part. But they just keep getting better and better as you do learn that process, you know, I think. And, you know, keeping that in mind, just to summarize it a little bit, You're working in a really general way first, and then more and more as you work, you're getting more and more specific. So general to specific. Keep coming back to that. That's a good mantra. And in that sense, like these areas that I have unpainted, they're not really going to do that much when I actually paint them. Like visually, they're kind of already looking like that. They're probably the next thing I'm going to do, but it's not going to change much. All right, and now we're gonna take, and I hope to at some point in this painting, probably in either the next session or the final session on this painting, I'm gonna do some palette knife here. But right now, I just wanna kind of mix up something a little bit more warm and golden. You might notice I'm mixing an area that has a little bit of green paint in it. Part of the plan, part of the plan. I kind of wanted the green. I'm gonna mix a little red into it. And really, I should keep it a little more quinacridone. But I'm trying to get a nice muted color. We're going to add that to that yellow. So see how that just took that color down a pretty good notch, not even just a little bit, kind of a lot. Maybe too much, probably too much. Let's find out. Ah, not the worst. We'll find some use for this color before we probably lighten things up a little bit. But we can kind of make a few marks. We'll use those marks to become other marks, other things. All just this like process of describing, and you know, over time these marks add up into something more, something a little bit, you know, difficult to get or impossible to get really in one pass. You kind of need to go back through and like revisit things to achieve it. So all right, I'm just gonna go a lot lighter but similar color. I liked that the way that that color was muted seemed like it was working pretty well. I'm going to take a little bit of that like sky color and put it in. And that cools it down. All right. I suddenly realized that as this form kind of turns directions and is reflecting a little bit more light, putting that sky color directly into the paint color, I think will help kind of sell that. And that's kind of like a bluish sky color that I added. I'm just trying to like turn that form just a little bit so we can kind of see where one plane ends and the other begins. There we go. Next to that kind of violet color, I'm going to really throw in quite a bit of a yellow. I think those two colors together will have some nice contrast and help me kind of develop this texture a little bit. Texture really requires contrast. Think about that. I have seen some beautifully painted textures that are almost invisible because there isn't quite enough contrast. The minute you turn up the contrast, you can see the texture. So I had an assignment once in college, and it was paint a painting with more than 7 textures. And it's probably impossible. I think it's kind of like folding a paper more than 7 times. It just can't be done. What I found was that really texture not only is dependent on contrast, but it's dependent on contrast with other textures. And once you get enough of them, it sort of becomes jumbled. Like you need a clear sort of like control group for this experiment in texture, you know? All right, and I'm just carrying that same color idea from that rock right down into this area, thinking about like the placement of 1, 2, 3. I like those 3 marks right there. We can't. In the next 5 minutes, just cover just a little bit more. All right. So now I want that kind of yellowy mark that I just did, those 3 marks. I think about them compositionally more than in a descriptive way, right? But I want them to remain visible. So I am now making a light purpley gray. And this light purpley gray is going to be what makes those marks remain visible. And luckily, it's in the painting or it's in the reference, so bonus. I was going to put it in anyways. It had to be here. Now, I often tell people if at any point in a landscape painting you've got a nice color on your brush, see if you can kind of pop that color around if you feel like it would be useful. Let's just kind of drag it around a few places. I don't want to commit too much to the shape of that contour, but it sure would be a great place to like relate to this color. And then I know this is very far from where I'm working, but and kind of color wise too. But I'm really thinking about how there's like all this purple coming around this way. And I just kind of noticed in the water, there is like this little bit of this violety color. And I just want to make sure that I have that noted and have that starting to like take shape in the composition. A little violet kind of arrow right through there. There we go. Because everything needs to be an X-shaped composition, right? It does give some stability, and I think I like it. I mean, obviously, I'm going to weave that in quite a bit more, but like I'm just establishing these lines at this time just to kind of make sure that they get there, and I think I like it. Next, the remaining couple of minutes that I have here, I am going to take a darker purple color, really dry paint. I just want to kind of like scrub through here because I know this is going to be a bit more textured. And I'm letting this paint be really pretty dry and scumbly and make these sort of random marks because of that. So letting those fibers of the canvas show through, that creates a sense of texture and airiness in a shadow, you know. It's not too dark, it's not too solid. Sort of like you can kind of see into it a little bit. Get this shape to kind of relate to it a little bit more. Like that. Oh, right, I need a horizon line. Let's put it there. I think that's a good spot for it. And then we will call it for the day. Okay, it's about 98% covered in. I think that's probably fine for a block in layer. Getting the composition, everything's situated. Thank you guys very much for being here. And I will see you next week.